Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is my Forbes colleague, senior editor Dan Alexander. Dan, thanks so much for coming on.
Hey, sure thing, Brittany.
You were reporting former President Donald Trump made $550 million during his time as president. I mean, that number is just staggering. But talk first about some of those questions surrounding Trump's finances that took until now to answer.
Yeah, we've known a lot of things about Trump's finances. Obviously, there's been a ton of attention on, what his financial portfolio was like, how much money he could have made. But there are still some fundamental questions that remain unanswered. So we knew how much revenue he brought in, but we didn't really know how much profit, for instance. That's a harder number to figure out because you have to know both the amount of money that's coming in and the expenses that are against that. This story was the first one to really take the whole portfolio over 4 years and on a property by property basis. Say, okay, here's what the operating profits of this business were, and then tally it up over the 4 years. And at the end of it, you do get to that very big number, $550 million.
Can you talk about specifically how you were able to tally these numbers and arrive at the number 550 million?
Sure. So there are several documents that came out while Trump was president, but many more that have come out since he left office, in part through the fraud trial in New York, in part because one of the House committees released his tax returns. And if you combine all of these documents that have come out over several years, you can sort of fill in the gaps and find the missing holes to then figure out, okay, what were the profitability of all of the properties, not just a random one here or a random one there, but each year, the whole portfolio, how much are they bringing in?
$550 million is a hard number to wrap your head around, but I want to talk about just how unprecedented this is. We know a president makes $400,000 a year, so aside from salary, historically have presidents brought in any other additional income during their time in office or anything even comparable to $550 million?
Well, presidents have long had other types of income. One of the more typical ones is, let's say that you publish a book while you're campaigning, and then you collect royalty checks once you're in office. That's a pretty typical thing. But in those cases, we're generally talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe low millions. $550 million is an extraordinary amount of money. And what's different in Trump's case is that he took this multi-billion-dollar business and rather than divesting from it, carried it into office. And that ensured that these profits that were throwing off, in some cases, more than $10 million a year would continue to do so while he served, which, of course, gave him all sorts of potential conflicts of interest, but also gave him this constant income stream that he had grown to expect.
So, Dan, I would love for you to take us year by year. Let's start when he's inaugurated in 2017. How much did he make that year and how did he make it?
So his earnings that year were $141 million. Now, in every year, the biggest generator of his earnings are really a couple of office buildings that he owns. He has a wide-ranging empire, but really the heart of his earnings come from just maybe a half dozen properties or so. So you're looking at 1290 Avenue of the Americas in New York City, 555 California Street in San Francisco, 40 Wall Street in Lower Manhattan, 6 East 57th Street in Midtown Manhattan. So those are the properties that really are sort of dominating his income statement. Now, interestingly, when he first joined the White House or went into the White House, he was still dealing with a lot of fallout from his campaign. So many of the licensing deals that he had gone away. Of course, The Apprentice was no longer kicking off significant amounts of income. And so that $141 million in his first year, while a lot, wasn't as much as he had been earning, for example, in 2015, the year that he announced that he was going to run for president. Then as he proceeds through the presidency, his business sort of begins to stabilize. And, his golf clubs that weren't doing so well start to do a little bit better. His office buildings are continuing to improve. He's kind of, reaching a point of, of stability for the company. And that continues on into 2019 as the economy is doing well and Trump continues to do well. So 18, he makes $154 million. 19, he makes $149 million. And then, of course, COVID hits. And that's really when the wheels fall off. And particularly at his hospitality properties. So we're talking about his hotel in Chicago, his hotel in Washington, D.C., his resorts in Scotland and in Ireland. and Doral, his golf resort down in Miami. All of those properties really start to struggle. You see massive losses, millions of dollars a year, where he's having to inject money to keep these things afloat. And meanwhile, his office buildings, which, although they've struggled long term from COVID, in the short term, actually sort of propped him up because remember, he has a bunch of big companies renting from him, and those big companies continue to pay their rents, even though they might not be very happy about the fact that they're locked into 5, 10 year long leases. They're still going to pay him in the short term. So that really kept the business afloat. But overall, his profits dropped to $111 million in 2020, which was his final full year in the White House.
During his time as president, he was an extremely polarizing figure. I mean, he still is, but during his time as commander in chief, did the nature of his divisiveness, did that impact his income?
It absolutely did. So, his licensing businesses, not just his product licensing business, which was sort of the ties, shirts, that sort of stuff, totally went away. Nobody who's selling a consumer product wants to be associated with a brand that now is going to turn off 50% of its customers. So those product licensing partnerships all dissipated. Then you have the real estate licensing deals, and those ones were sort of a mixed bag. But over time, many of them went away. So as people got close to the end of their contracts, or they just decided, you know what, this is really hurting us year after year, in many cases, you saw buyouts. So in Soho, in Manhattan, in Toronto, you see these huge sort of lump payments land all at once while Trump is president, which is nice. He gets a bunch of money in one moment, but then they go to zero the next year or near zero. So you have those sort of licensing businesses all begin to fade away. Now, you also had in some of his office buildings, some tenants who particularly like after January 6th were saying, I don't want to be connected with this guy. I want to be out of these buildings. But overall, in those situations, people were much less able to move out. And also, if you're renting space in 1290 Avenue of the Americas, which is a building in which Trump owns a 30% stake, most people coming into their law firm office in that building aren't thinking about Donald Trump. His name's not on the front of the building. And so he sort of does okay. So those businesses that aren't branded, namely 1290 Avenue of the Americas and 555 California Street, were really some of the standout strong businesses during his presidency, even as some of the ones that were more closely tied to his name began to struggle.
To your point, in your piece, you named one section, 2018, no name, no problem. So financially, for him, when his name's not slapped on a building, he fares better.
Yeah, I mean, in any portfolio, you want to have diversification. In Trump's portfolio, he was very heavy on his own name, but he did have a couple of key assets: 1290 Avenue of the Americas in New York City, 555 California Street in San Francisco, in which he only owns 30% stakes, and therefore his partner is in control of those deals. This is Vornado Realty Trust, a publicly traded company, and he doesn't have his name on it. That provided diversification for him. As many people were saying, we don't want to have anything to do with Trump, or even if they aren't, Democrats or people who dislike Trump, they might still say, you know what, do we really want to hold our, cardboard box conference at Trump National Doral, where there's a good chance that some of the people that we are going to be inviting are going to be offended by the venue. No, let's just host it at a different one instead. And so you have people fading away from those properties in a way that's really, really harmful to Trump. But then, as you say, you have other ones that people don't even know he owns. And in those cases, he tended to perform just fine.
As he reported, he made over $500 million during his 4 years as president. Is there any indication as of now of what he did with that money?
Well, he had to, pay his debts. He had to pay his employees. He had to pay his kids, and he had to live really well. So remember, he still owns several private aircraft. He owns mansions in places like St. Martin and upstate New York. And although he sold a couple of them, for instance, there's one in Los Angeles, he still owns significant amounts of personal property. All of that is really expensive. And so it's not like he made $550 million and it all went straight into his bank account and he's kept it the whole time. He has an expensive lifestyle and his business is expensive to run. And so much of that money went toward paying off debts and living large.
During his presidency, he did make a show of donating his salary each year. Is there any indication of how that impacted his bottom line?
It's a non-factor. That was purely a PR stunt. $400,000, whether he keeps it or doesn't keep it, doesn't matter to him. Even over 4 years, that's $1.6 million. Pure rounding error in terms of $550 million coming into in his business. So it didn't matter each way. He made the decision to say I wasn't going to take it or I was going to donate it. He got a lot of coverage out of big checks that he wrote to various places. And certainly a lot of people thought that he was super generous for doing so. But it's the equivalent of finding coins in your couch and figuring out whether you want to give them to your kid or keep them yourself. I mean, it doesn't matter.
As we know right now, he is running for president yet again. Let's say he does win in November. Is there any indication of what he's going to do with his businesses this time around?
Well, certainly if history is an indication, he will hang on to them. And now, of course, he's going to be going into office this time with a new business too, which is Trump Media and Technology Group, the parent company of Truth Social, the Twitter knockoff that Trump started after he was banned from Twitter in the wake of the January 6th riot. So that's going to add a whole nother dimension because, he came in office the first time with a set of businesses that weren't going to benefit from polarization. One of the few businesses that consistently benefits from polarization is social media. And now he's going to own a social media company. So for him to make, outlandish statements or do bombastic things or whatever is actually going to be helpful in driving engagement to True Social. And so he'll have, a financial incentive to do so. Now, that being said, True Social is a tiny business. It takes in very little revenue, makes no money, but investors are really excited about it. And so he might want to do things to keep them excited about it. And then that's in addition to, of course, all of the businesses that he had before and all of the potential issues that come there, whether it's, pressuring Jay Powell to change interest rates or, giving benefits to tenants of his office buildings or, dealing with foreign countries who have impact on his foreign licensing businesses. So all of those things are going to presumably come back into the White House in addition to the social media company the next time if he's able to win.
Dan Alexander, per usual, I appreciate your reporting. Thanks for coming on.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me.